Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider, a priest of the Church of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the Star Coast Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 116. We're talking about Unitatis Redintegratio 17 to 18 on moves for unity between East and West, right? So if you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican. So just to place ourselves, we're in chapter 3 of the document, talking about church and ecclesial, communities separated from the Roman Apostolic See. And yesterday we were in section 1, and we're going to conclude section 1 today, which is the special consideration of the Eastern churches. And then tomorrow we are going to move on to the Protestants. Anyway, so yesterday we talked about Eastern churches have valuable liturgical, canonical, and spiritual traditions that should be valued and respected. And today we're going to talk about how we can express doctrine in different ways, all as part of Christian tradition. And we don't want to impose more than needed on converts or on those who want to join in an ecumenical way where like a whole church or a whole congregation type thing happens. So we're going to start with paragraph 17 here, and there's two subparagraphs. A is on doctrine being explained differently, and these are complementary, not in opposition, right? And then B, Eastern traditions belong to the patrimony of the full Catholic Church, right? So the Catholic Church, as John Paul II would say, breathes with two lungs, East and West, right? Vatican II does not say that. That's a John Paul II term, I think. Maybe he got it from somewhere else. I don't know where he got it, but it has not been stated in this document of Vatican II. But I think John Paul II's analysis would fit perfectly with this. Anyways, let's start with paragraph 17a. What has just been said about the lawful variety that can exist in the Church must also be taken to apply to the differences in theological expression of doctrine. In the study of Revelation, East and West have followed different methods and have developed differently their understanding and confession of God's truth. It is hardly surprising, then, if from time to time one tradition has come nearer to a full appreciation of some aspects of a mystery of revelation than the other, or has expressed it to better advantage. In such cases, the various theological expressions are to be considered often as mutually complementary rather than conflicting. When the authentic theological traditions of the Eastern Church are concerned, we must recognize the admirable way in which they have roots in Holy Scripture and how they are nurtured and given expression in the life of the liturgy. They derive their strength, too, from the living tradition of the apostles and from the works of the fathers and the spiritual writings of the Eastern churches. Thus they promote the right ordering of Christian life and indeed pave the way for a full vision of Christian life. Right, so here is what we have about the doctrine and how doctrine can be expressed differently, and these are meant to be complementary, not in conflict. Right, I gave a very good example, I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before. We were talking about the idea of sanctification, making holy, and deification, make yourselves like God. And they're both really describing our spiritual life, how we grow closer to God, and by growing closer to God, we become holier, right? And that is not in conflict, but those can be complementary, right? And sure, each one expresses a slight nuance of it, but I think, honestly, if I'm teaching spiritual theology to seminarians, I'm going to use both because using both gives us a fuller view than either one of them alone, right? That's how they're complementary, right? So, each tradition comes closer in different aspects, right? That's fine. Like we as Roman Catholics would have some aspects we explain better than Eastern Orthodox and such like that, right? So we talk about how we had the Scholastic Revolution in the late Middle Ages, and we very systematized things, right? For example, Roman Catholics we have our 7 sacraments. The Eastern Orthodox have not systematized it that way. They would agree with basically all of our sacraments being sacraments, but they might not necessarily agree with our numbering, right? So would they distinguish confirmation and confession as 2 separate sacraments? Would they consider the vows of monks and nuns as sacraments? Within Eastern Orthodox, those would be things that could be debated, right? Whereas for us, it's very set down. But that kind of mystery and that not kind of harsh dividing line often, helps us to avoid kind of what some Catholics think, where it's like, oh, there's sacraments and there's everything else, and just kind of like those kind of devalue those things that are like very, very holy, very, very good sacramentals, but aren't sacraments, right? So, and then Eastern modes of explaining, they have a long tradition, right? They go back to the apostles, they go back to the liturgy, they go back to scripture, they're nurtured by the fathers. So this is something that's positive, something that's promoted Christian living, something that has kept these Christians, these millions of Christians, spiritually fed for about 2 millennium at this point, right? So we're in 2025 and just, sometime around 30 AD, just crucified and died. The exact date, we can, a whole other discussion, not here today, but sometime around 30 AD, right? Traditionally it's 33 AD, but then that assumes that Jesus was exactly 30 when it says he was about 30, and it assumes that he was born in 0 AD when he was probably born a little before then and things like that. That's why I say about 30. Anyway, so now moving on to 17b. Eastern traditions belong to the patrimony of the full Catholic Church, right? So this is that breathing with 2 lungs, we are one whole Catholic Church, East and West. Let's read it. All this heritage of spirituality and liturgy, of discipline and theology, in the various traditions of this Holy Synod declares to belong to the full Catholic Church and apostolic character of the Church. We thank God that many Eastern children of the Catholic Church who preserve this heritage and wish to express it more faithfully and completely in their lives are living in full communion with their brethren who follow the tradition of the West. Right, so this goes back to the last few days where we're talking about things. We're talking about, the monks, we talked about the liturgy, we talked about the theology, we talked about the discipline, and it's saying, hey, all of this is good, right? All of this is part of the whole Catholic and Apostolic Church, right? We have the 4 marks of the Church, one holy, Catholic, and Apostolic. And really, except for the one part, we have the other 3 marks in the Eastern Orthodox, right? And so we bring these all together and we see the goodness of this, right? This is being apostolic. This is being Catholic, universal. This is being, holy, help them be holy. And then the special gratitude for those who are united to the Catholic Church, right? The Eastern Catholics talked about those I think it was the last document, Orientalium Ecclesiatum, right? So that is paragraph 17. Paragraph 18 is saying, hey, we shouldn't impose unnecessary burdens on Orthodox who want, and we should work towards unity, right? This is kind of a final exhortation for the Orthodox before we move on to the Protestants to start tomorrow, and then I think we have 3 days on that, and that concludes this document. So let's read paragraph 18. After taking all these factors in consideration, this sacred council solemnly repeats the declaration of previous councils and Roman pontiffs, that for the restoration or maintenance of unity and communion, it is necessary to impose no burden beyond that which is what is essential. It is this council's urgent desire that, in the various organizations and living activities of the Church, every effort should be made toward the gradual realization of this unity, especially by prayer and by fraternal dialogue on points of doctrine and the more pressing pastoral problems of our time. Similarly, the Council commends the shepherds and faithful of the Catholic Church to develop close relations with those who are no longer living in the East, but are far from home, so that friendly collaboration with them may increase in the spirit of love to the exclusion of all feeling of rivalry or strife. If this cause is wholeheartedly promoted, the Council hopes that the barrier dividing the Eastern Church and Western Church will be removed, and that at last there may be one dwelling firmly established on Christ Jesus, the cornerstone, who will make both one. Right? We can definitely we can easily seek to be like, okay, you have to become like Roman Catholics. No. And like one of the things that is in canon law, I don't know if we've dealt with this already, but like if an Eastern Orthodox person converts, by default, unless they specifically say they want to convert to Roman Catholicism, they default convert to the same rite in the Catholic Church. So if they're Ukrainian Orthodox, they convert to Ukrainian Catholicism, right? Because we see this value, right? We're not asking them to do anything. The main thing you have to do is say the Pope is first of all, and the later councils and other things are valid, right? And the biggest thing there is that the Pope is not just first among equals, but is first in a priority way where he's above all the other patriarchs and things like that. That's the biggest thing that's absolutely needed. And obviously, we need to gradually work for unity. This is not something that's going to be achieved overnight. I hope we have some big moment in about 29 years when we have 2054, which is exactly 1,000 years. It would be great to have some kind of degree of reunification that year. And there's a special work here outside of where Eastern Christianity as its homeland, right? So we have a special work for most of us who are living in, Canada, U.S., Australia, UK, Ireland, things like that. There'll be some Eastern Orthodox, but they're far from their homes. So that part about that really applies to us, right? And how do we work with them? How do we talk with them, right? And that's great, right? So those kind of things are beautiful. And we need to work to remove barriers. If we want to work through this gradually, we need to work to remove barriers as well. So that concludes today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sgpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow I'm going to continue with the next paragraph, Unitatis Redemptio, 19 to 20, which is on the Protestant separated brethren. We're moving on to the Protestants from the Orthodox. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information, like playlists and a reading plan, go to sgpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SGPN on Facebook and X. We have also set up an email for questions and comments, which is Vatican, the number 2, at sgpn.com, Vatican2 at sgpn.com, and my website, frmatthewlc.com, has a contact form right in the top bar, so frmatthewlc.com.
Amen.